So before moving on further, I'd like to acknowledge and recognize publicly our statewide Program Advisory Committee. These are environmental professionals from government, nonprofits, the educational world, the business world, and without them, we could not put on this great symposium. We rely on their expertise to help us bring in a range of topics with a diversity of viewpoints within those topics. So I'd like to ask the members of the Program Advisory Council, I see you out there, please stand up and be recognized. Please, ladies and gentlemen, stand up. There you are up there. Great. Thank you very much. Now, it's great to see a return after COVID of the crowd here, and we have many long-standing members who come to the conference, but we've got a lot of new members this year, and for you new members, I want to welcome you to the Environment Virginia family. We really do see this as a family reunion every year with an opportunity for professionals like yourself to network and share critical ideas on this very important topic of national concern. So look to see you coming back next year. So welcome to each and every new member. So now, ladies and gentlemen, we are pleased to bring you our keynote session for today. We have three panelists who have been on our Program Advisory Committee. The fourth has been attending this conference for many, many years. We've asked them to share their vision for their departments with you. Today's moderator of that session is Roy Hoagland. He is a longtime attendee of this conference, and he has worked on Chesapeake Bay watershed issues over the past 35 years, advocating for clean water and healthy local and regional environments in communities and forums and in various arenas. He has legislative, regulatory, and policy experience at the state, regional, and federal levels. Importantly, he is a past winner of our Urschel Environmental Leadership Award and is currently Senior Program Officer at Virginia Environmental Endowment. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Roy Hoagland.
Good morning. Welcome to Environment Virginia. As I was introduced, my name is Roy Hoagland. I'm a Senior Program Officer with the Virginia Environmental Endowment. The endowment, you may know, has been a supporter of Environment Virginia since its very beginnings and continues to serve as a sponsor on an annual basis. So it's my pleasure to be here this morning and to serve as the moderator for this discussion. I'll introduce each of our panelists briefly, and then we'll move right into what I hope will be a dialogue on a variety of issues. I've encouraged each of them to comment on questions, even if one is not directed to them specifically. We're not going to have time for questions and answers from the audience, so take good notes and pigeonhole them once they walk off the stage. Let's start with Matt. Go right down the line here. By the way, guys, leave the mics on. They said don't turn them on and off during the presentation. Matt Wells is the director of the Department of Conservation and Recreation. Many of you may know him from his work at West Rock for a number of years. In addition, he was very active with Virginia Forever, which is a coalition of business and environmental groups that work to advocate for funding for land conservation dollars and water quality dollars. He is a graduate of the University of Virginia and Virginia Commonwealth. These are my cheat sheets, even though I know most of them.
You forgot the most important thing, that I've been on the planning committee for this conference.
Oh, excuse me. And Matt has been on the planning committee for this conference. I know the next one, Mike Rolban. Mike and I have known each other since 1989. Actually, we decided it was okay to share that fact. I don't know whether it helps him or hurts him. Mike was the founder of Wetland Studies and Solutions. He owned that company for a number of years and then sold it. Tried to retire but couldn't. During those years, he became an expert and a leading member of the community here in Virginia on wetlands banking and stormwater management. He's currently the director of the Department of Environmental Quality, and he's a graduate of Cornell, where he has done a great deal towards helping engineering students as they move forward in their careers. So Becky is the person I know least on the stage. She's from the Department of Wildlife Resources, where she is Executive Deputy Director, correct? Many of you know that Department of Wildlife Resources, to us old folks, is the Department of Game and Inland Fisheries. It changed its name a couple of years ago. Becky's expertise has been in land conservation for the many years she has worked at DWR, which dates back to 1988. So I think she's our longest serving state representative on the panel today.
Thanks for how you said that.
And then finally we have Rob Farrell, who is the state forester. For those of you who don't know, the state forester is basically the executive director of the forestry department. And Rob is, if I remember right, UVA? Oh, Virginia Tech.
Well, you're my favorite moderator. I paid him $20 to do that.
Hands up the Virginia Tech students.
Okay.
He has been with the forestry department since 2018, correct? Or even state forester since 2018.
Been with the agency since 2000.
Since 2000, great. Well, I'm going to start with an easy first question. I don't need my notes on the first question anyway. I'd like each of you to take a few minutes and describe the top three. I know my question said top 5, but I'm afraid about time. Top 3 priorities that are facing your agency right now. Matt.
Let's go to the line. Sure. I think, broadly, if you look at sort of what my priorities are as an agency head, I'm a conservationist, and I want to leave it better than I found it, which is somewhat difficult because I found it in pretty good shape with a great team, but I think there's always opportunities for improvement. DCR has a number of facets, and so I'll tackle a couple of those if I can. On the outdoor side, I think we're going to make a big push to expand and enhance access to outdoor recreation. That takes a number of forms. It means opening new parks. We've got 4 in the hopper right now to add on to the 41 that we've got. We've got one of those 41 that's going to be releasing the master plan soon. So I think that'll, from a footprint standpoint, that'll expand where we can offer those services. It means offering additional services at the parks we have, additional overnight accommodations, additional amenities. It means enhancing our value add for our guests, and so I think we've got an opportunity to deliver a tremendous amount of environmental education for our guests, to be really one of the premier outlets for environmental ed in Virginia. And so I think leaning into that over the next couple of years is going to be a significant effort. I think looking at how our parks are accessible to to Virginians that may have limited mobility or other factors is going to be important. And then I think finally on the outdoor rec side, people expect safe, well-maintained facilities. Some of you may know that State Parks had a $360 million deferred maintenance backlog. We have gotten that down to about $275 million, which is great. That is tremendous progress thanks to the budget that got passed last year, but certainly a significant way to go. I think our preserve system also plays a role in providing access to outdoor rec. We have to do that in a very smart way because we want to, above all, with those properties, to preserve the resource. I think looking on sort of the water side of the house, certainly driving towards our water quality goals with the Chesapeake Bay. We've got significant dollars flowing into that program. We can talk about that later if we want, but making sure that those dollars get on the ground, that they're spent wisely, that our producers are getting the support they need to make the improvements that they have to make to meet our water quality goals. And then I think kind of on the flooding and resilience side, we've got a tremendous challenge when it comes to dams. We talked about it last year. We've got a lot of unknown unknowns, and so chipping down on those, mitigating the highest risk structures that we have, and then when it comes to flooding and resilience, really this is one, about funding good projects, but two, about putting ourselves in a position for future success. We've got a lot of planning activities that we're working on, and so being able to deliver on those plans so that future folks that are working on this have a roadmap. So I think those are kind of my big three. And I know there was 5 in there, so I cheated.
That's okay. Thank you. Mike?
DEQ had the benefit of spending 2 hours telling everybody about this yesterday. But we have one overarching goal, period. And that is we're maniacally focused on improving response times to the community, to the public, to the permittees, to everybody. That's our number one focus. Everything we're doing is focused on how to improve our performance.
Thank you, Mike. Becky?
Very succinct, thank you, Mike.
We're all
Matt,
surprised.
Exactly.
Mike just wanted to take a safe answer so I didn't get a tough follow-up question.
Following Mike is never easy. At DWR, we have some areas of interest that are common to what you've expressed, Matt, in that, the department owns over 250,000 acres across the Commonwealth, primarily in wildlife management areas, wildlife conservation sites. Not many people know about them, so one of our primary focus over the next 3 to 5 years is improving public awareness about and access to those particular properties. They saw a lot of attention during the pandemic, and so now we're trying to make sure that the purposes for which those properties were bought, which was maintaining habitat for wildlife, and some public recreation, is something that we can manage and sustain. One of the probably most important things for us is diversifying our workforce. Many people may not realize that the wildlife management and conservation profession has historically been dominated by white men, and so diversifying our workforce, including more women, people of color, and considering values that are different than the ones that have historically been a part of the management and conservation profession is really important to us in several aspects. People are looking for non-lethal solutions to problematic wildlife challenges like too many deer in Northern Virginia. And we also have a statewide conservation police force where we feel that's really where the rubber meets the road in terms of many of our wildlife conservation and management goals and objectives, and diversifying that workforce is really important from our perspective. And the last component that's a priority for us is something that Matt also spoke to, and that is evaluating and restoring and protecting the investments that the federal government and the Commonwealth and its citizens have made in not only our properties, but also our dam infrastructure, and that's dam DAM, but maybe the other. And as we've continued to assess that, especially in coastal Virginia, the impacts that we're seeing related to rising sea levels, loss of natural habitats, has become really impactful and something that we have identified as really an important priority need from our perspective.
Thank you. Rob, am I forgiven yet?
We're working up
Okay.
to it. I'll let you know, Roy. So the key message that I want to give today, and I brought some visual aids. If you hand that down, Becky to Matt. I was hoping we'd have a table and we would have name tents out. So I prepared these. Sorry, Becky, you get the kind of kind of plain. Yeah. So the key message for the Department of Forestry's mission: trees are the answer. Whatever the problem is, trees are the solution. We got to get the word out.
Can I keep this, Rob?
What's that?
Can I keep this?
Absolutely. I hope so. So the challenge we face with the forest today is that Virginia's forests are 80% owned by private individuals. The state forest system in Virginia is 78,000 acres out of 16 million acres of forest. The only way we enhance, protect, grow the forest is by working with those private landowners. So our focus is on doing more work, providing more one-on-one assistance to landowners. We have to encourage, enable, educate, facilitate landowners getting good forest management work done on their forests to address all the challenges that the forests face. And one of the drivers of helping landowners to get work done on their forest is by having markets for forest products. Money drives landowner decisions, and markets enable management. So I'm guessing we'll talk about some forest products here in the next 40 minutes or so. But enabling landowners to get work done on the land, that's our key. Getting more trees planted in buffers, all those good things that we can do in the forest. That's our focus.
Thanks. Let me follow up with three of you. The past two administrations had some specific land conservation goals. One of them, the Kane administration had a certain acreage goal. The Northam administration then established Conserve Virginia. And I was hoping the three of you, Mike, I know this question doesn't affect you.
We just regulate everybody.
But I have a follow-up for you. We just regulate everybody. What are the land conservation goals for this administration, or your department specifically, and how will you know whether you're successful by the time this administration completes its term?
You want me to tackle that one first?
Sure.
Sure. So we don't have an acreage goal right now. I think we are more focused on quality preservation than quantity, and preserving the lands of highest conservation value. You mentioned the Conserve Virginia program, which is online. It's available on DCR's website. It is a great tool. And I think we're going to continue to build upon that. This is a very data-focused administration. So I think that has given us a benchmark to go out and to try to find these lands of highest conservation value. Specific to DCR, a lot of times that manifests in additions to our natural area preserves. So we have added 400 acres to the preserve system last year, which is great. We just reached an agreement with Stafford to add a significant 800-acre, give or take, portion of land to the Crow's Nest Preserve. So that'll be pristine land in Northern Virginia that I'm very excited about. So I think that's the direction that we're headed in. I also, would be remiss if I didn't point out that Virginia has tremendous tools for people that want to conserve land. We have a very popular land preservation tax credit that gets maxed out every year. We have a well-funded Virginia Land Conservation Foundation program. We gave out 40 grants, I think about $15 million this year. So I think at the end of the day, if we look at the map and we have moved the ball forward on preserving these high-value conservation lands at the end of the administration, I'll be pretty happy.
So while the administration doesn't have an acreage goal, we are looking at increasing opportunity. And that's not only at our existing properties like state parks and wildlife management areas, but also securing additional new opportunities and areas for Virginians to recreate at. So at DWR, we're leveraging the tools that Matt mentioned, the Conserve Virginia database, data layers, and our own strategic land conservation priorities, thinking about corridors for natural wildlife movement across the Commonwealth, and focusing on areas, particularly in coastal Virginia and Northern Virginia, where we're continuing to see increasing pressures on natural habitats, increasing conflicts between humans and wildlife, and some strategic focus in Southwest Virginia, where we have some of the most imperiled wildlife assemblages across the Commonwealth, and also tremendous opportunity as part of our elk restoration initiative. So all of those are part of our portfolio. We just completed an 8,000 acre acquisition on the Eastern Shore, which for us last year was unique. Usually our wildlife management areas are large as a single tract of land, and this 8,000 acres is actually a chain of parcels that runs down Accomack County and into Northampton County, and so really provides a valuable wildlife conservation migration corridor for the literally millions of birds that migrate down the Delmarva Peninsula every fall in their southern migrations to their wintering grounds in Central and South America. So ambitiously taking advantage of opportunities like that to secure new habitats for wildlife, create expanded opportunities for Virginians and visitors to enjoy the outdoors and everything that that has to offer.
Thank you.
So to, obviously, as Matt spoke to, we have great analysis has been done to identify the key parcels and properties in Virginia. If you're going to protect a cave, you have to protect the property that cave entrance is in. That specific property is critical to protect that cave. From our perspective, forestry, and I'll include agriculture in this, working lands, this farm isn't necessarily critical compared to that farm. What we need is a density of farms on the landscape to enable that culture and that industry to survive, and the same thing is true for forestry. This forest, while they're, depending on the criteria you use, this forest is much more critical than that forest. But in general, we need a lot more forest on the landscape, and whether it's this forest or it's that forest, we just need to make sure there's enough forest on the landscape to continue to provide habitat and water quality. So while we are looking to protect more individual specific high conservation value properties, we're also focused on how do we ensure that private landowners are able to continue to work the land and keep working land on the landscape. One of the great things that came out of the General Assembly last year is the Forest Sustainability Fund. And what this does is help localities, it reimburses localities for some of the revenue that they lose by offering use value taxation. Landowners that own farms and forests or have conserved land, they pay a lower tax value rate compared to the real estate value. That's foregone revenue by the locality. But that is a huge enabler of landowners to keep working land on the landscape. So having the Forest Sustainability Fund and finding funding to help provide that funding to the localities, we think is a key to keeping working lands on the landscape.
I'd just add one thing if I could, because we've talked quite a bit about government and individual property owners, but I do want to say we are tremendously blessed in Virginia to have a strong land conservation community of nonprofits that we all work with that help us, and that, at least for DCR, we certainly couldn't accomplish our mission without them. So I didn't want this question to go without commending them and recognizing the tremendous work that they do.
Thank you. Thank you, all of you. Mike, I don't want to leave you isolated, so
Back to you.
I think, to follow up on your answer, I don't think we've ever had a panelist use the word maniacal before. And so why don't you share with the audience what you have done to meet your maniacal needs? You mentioned PEEPS last year. When you were here, you started PEEPS. So why don't you share some of the specifics that the department's pursuing?
Sure. I'll start with PEEP. There's a presentation tomorrow if people want to go to it and learn all the details. But basically, for every program in Virginia, every permit program at DEQ, we're developing a schedule that's online. It's just a Gantt-style schedule which tracks the major tasks it takes to get to a decision point on a permit or like a banking instrument. It tells you which agency is responsible for that particular task, as well as it tracks the applicant. And so you can see where you are in the process. It's also being used as a management tool so that each permit writer has a page that they can access. It gives them their workload. It also has a summary that I and other managers can look at that sees everybody. You can drill down, from the top all the way down to the individual permit to see what's going on. I think the best benefit is, number one, for the public that asks a lot of times, what's going on with this project? Where's that permit? They can go online and see it, see where it is. The applicants and their agents can look and see where they are in the permit process. and it automatically sends emails out to remind people of upcoming deadlines, including now the owner. So sometimes there were games being played with incomplete applications. We're handling that with a checklist for every permit program. You have to have a complete application. We review it in 15 days, or we send it back to you. That's our goal. And then if it's not complete, we track how long it sits at the applicant and their agent. So when people say it's been 9 months, we've had a great one when I first came here on a stormwater plan. Oh, yes, it took 9 months to get approval. 7 of the 9 months, it sat at the applicant's agent. Okay, so it's open to everybody. We're being totally transparent and trying to communicate to the public. That's permeating all the things like yesterday Lee talked about the enforcement agencies. You know, everything we do, we're trying to track, and we have one OKR from the governor, an objective and key result, and that's to increase, or decrease rather, the time it takes to make decisions, yes or no. One DEQ is another major element where we're trying to spread work across the 6 offices and central office, because during different times of the year, different programs in different locations have either too much or too little work. So we're trying to spread the wealth and get everyone to pitch in to work together. And that's really, really helping. Stormwater, I've got a whole bunch of things going on that I can bore everyone to death with because I love that topic. But I will say that there's a lot of problems because we have basically 30 years of manuals and guidance documents that are almost 23 inches tall, and they're not consistent with each other. So we're trying to create one new stormwater handbook. We have a 60-person SAG that's working on that. A contractor, Arcadis, Fernando Pascual is here, and Evan Brankowski is our chief policy advisor. His total focus right now is on that stormwater program, and he's working. They're both here, and there'll be a presentation, I believe it's later today, on that topic if you want to learn some more details. In the wetlands field, we have a lot of issues. We have a Coiner bill just got passed. I got multiple emails about that this morning for some reason, but I would like the budget to be approved before I answer them. Dave Davis, I see you here, is sitting next to Tricia. Actually, Tricia's in charge of the P program, Dave's in charge of the wetlands program, and we have a lot of delays on permits due to a shortage periodically throughout the state of mitigation credits or in lieu fee credits. And so we're addressing it, several ways. Our next step after the stormwater manual is done is to create a commodity trading platform, to create a real market for these credits. It's regulatory driven, but right now the price, the quantity, and the supply are not easily accessible or at all to anybody. So we're trying to have a real market, and that'll stimulate more investment in that area. Later today around 1 o'clock, the Colonel and I are going to sign an MOA between the Army Corps and DEQ to look at mitigation banking, and we're dividing and conquering. Instead of duplicating all our efforts, we're taking both of our staffs and we're separating who does what, who's responsible. We are tying that into our PEEP program. The MOA has a schedule that's in our PEEP system, and we're going to track every agency. The Army Corps and DEQ are the prime ones, but we have a gazillion other agencies, federal and state, that comment on it. Everyone's activity is going to be tracked. They have a schedule. Unfortunately, there's a penalty for exceeding the schedule, but it'll be publicly available, and hopefully that'll help people be motivated to try to get things done faster. The typical mitigation bank in the country right now takes over 1,100 days to get approved. Norfolk's and Virginia are in the wrong side of the 1,100. We're going to try to get it down to 455 days, A to Z, including applicant time. I know it can be beat because I did the first one ever in Virginia in 1991. It took less than the average time now, and we got it down to 6 months. Then the federal government published a regulation, and it ballooned, okay? But the regs don't require a lot of the time. So those are the main big things that we're doing. I mean, there's a whole bunch of other little things, but everything is being driven by, we have one objective and key result to report to the governor, and we're already making huge differences in that. And most of the ideas, the way we're doing it, it's all coming from the people that are at DEQ. I mean, I just set a goal, and let's do it. Here's some ways we can get there, but the actual, the blocking and tackling, figuring out what to do, figuring out the processes, figuring out the checklist, it's 100% driven by staff, and it's just wonderful. So thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Let me follow up on something you said, Becky, about diversifying workforce. We have up here, 4 white guys of privilege, right? Typical of the environmental community. Becky, you mentioned that DWR is looking at diversifying its workforce. I know it has some history there, unfortunate history, actually. What I'd like to ask each of you, we have now an Environmental Justice Act here in Virginia. It calls for incorporating the policies of that act into the work of each agency. So I'd like you to answer 2 questions for me, if you would. One, what does environmental justice mean to you, and how does it impact your decisions? And then what, in fact, is your agency doing to embrace and incorporate the Environmental Justice Act provisions? Who would like to go first? Mike, I know you have an answer, so.
Well, there's several things. Number one, environmental justice has been an difficult topic to get a handle on in terms of we have staff that are dedicated to that, but what are they supposed to be doing? And so we have put out for public comment, it's out there now for informal public comment, environmental justice guidance document. And hopefully people will read it and give us positive comments, but you can give negative ones too, or constructive ones are even better. But what we're trying to do is tell everybody, the public, the permittees, and our staff, what should we be doing to address environmental justice in the permit world, okay? And we're trying to comply with both federal requirements and state requirements. The second aspect of that is in more decisions like purchasing, which is more of a statewide initiative, and that's being addressed, it has already been addressed previous administrations, and we're continuing those types of things, but also in our grants and loans program. And what I found is they actually already were looking at these issues. So that's going extraordinarily well. I'm not saying it can't be improved. I'm also, another hat I have is I'm on the board of the Virginia Resource Authority, where we give loans to different government agencies around the state. And again, I mean, they already were deploying, maybe non-intentional originally, but a lot of it was trying to help communities that need financial help. They happen to virtually always be an environmental justice community. So they get lower interest rates, there's more grants available. It's just they're already being examined into that light. So I think there's a lot of things at least in our agency that are going forward in a positive manner in that area.
I'm happy to tag on to that. So I think when I think about environmental justice, I think about it from a couple of things. One is making sure everybody has a seat at the table. The second part of that is making sure that the table is set in a way that is inviting for people to participate, which can mean being proactive and going out into the community, setting the table where they are maybe. And I think it means making sure that the programs that we have work for everyone, and again, to kind of look at the water and the land side of the house. On the water side, we've got a number of tax and working groups, and we've tried to be as inclusive as we can with those, to the point that they've gotten pretty large. But even beyond that, one of the requirements that we have for the Coastal Resilience Master Plan and the statewide flood plan that we're putting together is a community outreach and engagement plan. And when we went to put the plan together and went out for public comment at the end of last year, we wanted to make sure that we were taking a whole community approach. We wanted to get beyond the TAC. The TACs are great. A lot of these people out here serve on TACs. They're very knowledgeable. You need their voices. But there are people in the community who need to have their voice heard too, and that means going to them. And so as we look to develop these plans, that's something that we will be doing, is going out in the community, trying to engage folks where they are, because particularly on flooding, flooding affects everyone. It's not just a coastal problem. In fact, if you look at a map of flooding events over the Commonwealth and you lay it over the EJ community map that Mike's agency put out, there's a lot of overlap, and particularly in the valley in the Southwest, you get a lot of flooding events there. But it does disproportionately impact minorities more, and so making sure that we hear everyone's voice on that. I think it means making sure as well that we're being transparent. Mike talked about that in our actions. It means a lot of public comment, inviting people to participate, particularly when it comes to programs. There's a requirement with the Community Flood Preparedness Fund that at least 25% of the funds that we put out go to low-income geographic areas. Of the roughly $100 million that we've put out through that program, 67% has gone to low-income communities. So I'm pretty proud about that. I think on the land side of the house, one of the things that we try to do as we hire folks for our parks is we do try to find people who reflect the communities that those parks are in. We certainly have a lot of challenges when it comes to recruitment overall, but that is a goal for us. We have recently brought on a cultural resources manager to make sure that we are able to preserve and interpret the cultural resources that we have and to tell the stories that are appropriate to those cultural resources. And then I think a very concrete thing, recently the Virginia Land Conservation Foundation grants were opened up to Virginia tribes. We actually had a couple of grants this cycle go to Virginia's tribes, and we worked with Senator Marsden this year on legislation that would add a specific tribal seat to the board. Previously, there was a requirement to have a tribal member of this as a specific seat. So I think all of those things are tangible manifestations of how we try to approach EJ.
Thank you. Rob and Becky?
Sure. So as I was listening to both Matt and Mike talk about their programs, I'm reflecting on access to the outdoors, access to wildlife, and really, from DWR's perspective, there should be no barriers. So as we think about regulatory aspects of that, what does it cost to buy a hunting or fishing license? If you want to hunt or fish from a subsistence perspective, which many people do across Virginia, that's how they feed their families and their communities. Part of our considerations as we think about that aspect of our regulatory component of our regulatory work is, not pricing people out of an ability to harvest game and fish in Virginia for food. Another thing we think about is engaging people in the outdoors. It's remarkable to me to learn, and even though, as Roy intimated, my tenure at DWR has been over 35 years, I've only really come to appreciate in the last 5, I think, that many communities of color really are not involved in outdoor-related recreation. They don't get outdoors. They don't participate in wildlife viewing or hunting or fishing. And I find myself asking why. And so we have taken really an inward-looking approach to creating a culture of awareness and understanding about why that is, and trying to engage with communities across the Commonwealth. Matt mentioned tribal engagement. So we see them not as stakeholders, but as co-managers of wildlife on the landscape. And that's a new perspective for us as an organization. And it's interesting to navigate and understand and appreciate that nation-to-nation relationship when it comes to fish and wildlife management and conservation on the landscape. And we have taken some bold steps over the last few years to engage not only with tribes, but with communities of color to understand the perspectives they bring to why do they not participate in outdoor-related recreation? How can we facilitate and enable that? And how can we as an agency be more bold and ambitious in our own recruitment to bring people of color into our organization so that we are more reflective of Virginia's communities than we have been for the most of the last 100 years of our existence and as an organization. So perhaps less outward-facing and more inward-facing. We've done a lot of soul-searching over the last 5 years, and I think it's starting to bear fruit. There's greater diversity in our law enforcement complement of conservation police officers. We're seeing some diversity in our resource professionals. That's still an area of improvement for us, bringing people of color into our agency as part of our biological staff. But across other aspects in our outreach and administrative functions, we certainly have those new perspectives, new voices, and it's bearing fruit in terms of our message, in terms of our outreach and communication, and really finding new ways to help underserved, underrepresented communities appreciate Virginia's wildlife and have it as something that they think about first and foremost.
Thank you.
Yeah, and to build on that, a very similar thought that, our agency does not reflect the population of Virginia, and that's something that we're working to improve. But, we're looking at it, we recruit from the pool of applicants that choose to want to work for us. And so the challenge of diversifying our workforce goes beyond outreach for the job ads. Like to be in Virginia, to title yourself as a forester, you have to have a forestry degree from an accredited university program. And well, the accredited university programs aren't all that much more diverse than our agency. And so the only way we're going to be successful, for that specific role of forester is if we encourage a more diverse community to be interested in becoming foresters and studying that at a university. Obviously, there's a whole lot more ways to get to a job than going through a university. So what we're looking at is, as Becky mentioned, there are people who do not take advantage of the natural resources, and we need to address this whole cultural issue of the natural. I have other issues other than the natural resources. Trees. What do I care about trees? I've got other problems, and so I think we have to make a better case for why trees, nature, natural resources, water quality matter to communities. And do a better job of getting folks interested, understanding the benefit of natural resources to their family and their health, and then hopefully some of those young people will become interested in actually working with natural resources, and then we will have a more diverse pool to recruit from. And so obviously we have to work on it now, but it is a generational shift that I think it's going to take. And one of the great opportunities that we have seen very recently is the recognition between the absence of trees in urban areas and human health. Not having trees in cities makes people less healthy. It's hotter, it's dustier, it's bad for your mental health. So our efforts to address urban heat islands, to address the correlation between lack of tree canopy and lack of means in a community, if we can go into those communities, help them understand the connection between trees and their family's health, that's an opportunity for us to bridge that gap and to help demonstrate the benefits of trees and nature to folks, and hopefully, again, increase the number of people who are considering natural resources as a profession.
Thanks, Rob. Mike, you have something to add?
I just want to add a couple things, two different topics, but one is increasing the diversity of the workforce. It's happening, it just takes a lot of time. And I know, the environmental science field that my old company we used to hire from, that has become more women dominated than, over my career. But the engineering field, like when I went to college, it was 20-to-1 guys to girls. And my wife was one of the 3 girls. Yeah. Well, it took a couple tries, but.
And she had all those men, and she picked you.
But when I was teaching, I went back and part-time as taught before I took this little retirement thing, and it was amazing. The civil and environmental engineering program was 80% women. My last semester, I only had women, and there were several other minorities, in that group, and it's just totally changed. So now you're hiring from a pool that is a totally different pool. So I think it takes time. I sold my company to a tree company, as he knows, and they're having a tough time to get people that want to climb trees with chainsaws. There's very few women that are doing that, but more and more. And so they're getting out into the high schools and doing programs and talking about going to a community college for a little more education to become an arborist or urban tree forester. So it's just going to take a lot of time at that type of STEM education level. And then lastly, urban trees are critical, One thing that I hope is going to, I'm sure it's going to make it into the stormwater manual, is a BMP for trees. And try to act, trees are good.
Trees are the
Trees
answer.
are the
Trees are the
Trees are the
answer.
answer, I almost got, but convincing people, and sometimes we have to look at more than just nitrogen and phosphorus. And so there's some other elements, and it's hard, we got to meet our TMDL requirements, but, there's other aspects. The triple bottom line analysis, like we worked on with DC Water, theoretically the trees are free, but reality is you still got to pay for them, you got to water them and care for them. So it depends, there's different ways to account for that. We still have to be able to afford these things, but we have to look at these other benefits.
Matt, did you want to add something?
I was just going to say, for parks, parks are for everybody, and it's been gratifying to see that there is a lot of diversity in the users of our park, particularly in Northern Virginia, and areas with large diverse populations. So we don't necessarily have the same problem as maybe some of the other agencies about diversity of user base. Would love to see that translate more into diversity of people wanting to come work for us. And part of my sneaky reason for wanting to really lean into the educational aspect is maybe playing a little bit of the long game in the hopes that delivering that education sparks something in those visitors that makes them want to choose a career in natural resources. So I do think, there's some long game aspect to it, but we do have such a wonderfully diverse user base at many of our parks that we want to be able to reflect that.
Becky?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to Rob's comment about, the base of potential applicants that we pull from, right? That, again, the fish and wildlife conservation and management profession historically predominantly dominated by white men. And one of the things that we've done very recently at DWR is paid internships. In the wildlife profession, internships, typically unpaid, was how you earned your chops and essentially made yourself more ready to become hireable as a wildlife conservation professional. And it was remarkable to see and have a collective sort of sense amongst our leadership team at DWR about how important it was to removing barriers like those individuals who don't have the ability to spend the summer doing something that is in effect work without receiving compensation for it. And we have had just dramatic and tremendous response to now our second year of 10 paid internships that function in a wide variety of capacities across our agency and support a variety of programs in the organization, and how rewarding that's been just for our team as a whole to see the response to and kind of open our eyes to the needs that existed that we really didn't even appreciate.
Well, thank you all for some really thoughtful answers to that question. I'm grateful. I have to make sure, since I worked for the Bay Foundation for 20-some years, that we don't skip Chesapeake Bay restoration issues. So
I thought our time was, no.
we have the 2025 deadline rapidly approaching. Can each of you address what you're doing to accelerate pollution reduction? And are you optimistic, pessimistic, and what do you see for the future of the Bay restoration effort? Who'd like to go first? Rob?
Everyone?
Wait, hang on,
Trees
I'll
are
put it
the
in my
answer.
pocket. Yeah, there we go.
So, plant more trees. That's what we're doing. And we will plant more trees.
So we're doing two things at DWR of primary focus. One is taking the leadership role on Virginia's component of the Bay-wide Wetland Conservation Restoration Plan, and also working on our own coastal properties to try to reduce nutrient and sediment loading and restore marsh habitats that are being lost right now to rising seas.
Two areas. One, a lot of our MS4 permits have taken forever to reissue. So the theoretical 15-year cycle of 3 5-year permits getting to the goal, we're way behind because we aren't issuing them. So our staff is working with the applicants or the permittees to try to accelerate that process in this next revision. That's one area. The other areas we're trying to obviously refine and improve our stormwater management aspects. And there were grandfathering, as you know, that was a 10-year period for some projects. That ends in 2024. So we're working on a bunch of stormwater things that will culminate in a new permit on July 1st, 2024. But on top of that, as we're going through that process, we've determined, and we're working with EPA, we have a letter that's public knowledge about the lawn fertilizer. So actually, Roy and I and others worked 15, 20 years ago originally trying to ban phosphorus in lawn fertilizer because you don't need it to grow lawns after the first year. And that ended up in our WIP 1. It ended up, that was in 2010. We changed the law in 2011, and we actually have a dramatic decrease in phosphorus. Over 1 million pounds of elemental phosphorus less per year is being put on the ground versus the model based on the data we've gotten from VDAX. So that EPA is working in the model. My hunch is we've probably hit the phosphorus goal. We're darn close to it. We're also darn close to the sediment goal, so we really got to refocus on nitrogen, and I think that'll drive our future policies.
And that's where I come in. So the bulk of the nitrogen reductions are due to come from the agricultural sector. Before I do forget, Mike mentioned working with EPA. I think one thing that we need to do a better job of doing is making sure that we're getting credit for the practices that we do have on the ground. The model makes certain assumptions about practices expiring that may not actually be there in fact. But regardless, I think in terms of, we will make our water quality goals. Will we make them by 2025? That's tough. And I think the governor's been pretty clear on that regardless, we're not going to take our foot off the gas. The big way that we support that is through passing through the funding for the cost share program. We, as a state, fully funded the ag needs assessment for the first time ever in last year's budget. Historically underfunding that program has placed us tremendously behind where we should be, but I think this is a good start. The governor's proposed budget this year added more funding to that to continue to meet a revised ag needs assessment. And then on top of meeting the needs assessment, the governor proposed putting another $50 million into the program. So this would be the only time that the state has actually done more than what the needs assessment says. And I think that's a reflection of the importance that we place on this, of the desire to keep moving the ball forward on that. So I would say, just to wrap it up, that in addition to the money, you also need people to put the practices on the ground. I think one area that we can continue to make progress is in bringing more producers into the program. That I think that the soil and water districts and our partners in the ag community have done a lot of that in the past. I think that there is a role for DCR to play in helping bring more producers in. We've got a smaller fraction of people that are doing these practices now than we need to meet our goals. So I think funding and then getting people to put the funding into practice.
One thing I don't want to have everyone forget is that we have made incredible progress. I mean, first time I grew up in Vermont, I didn't know water could be so dirty until I came down here at 78. I jumped in the Potomac River, went swimming. People were appalled at me, and I smelled afterwards. And then in National Harbor, the head of MDE, we all did a SAV survey. It took him 6 months to get rid of the infections from a scratch he had on the leg from the water. That was in the early 90s. The water is so much better. And then a lot of is the air. So I see Mike Dowd over there. And I mean, the air is so much cleaner now that the dry fall deposition, the rainfall quality is amazingly better. And some of the recent event mean concentration studies have shown from the NERP studies we were using in the 70s, basically on average, it's about 50% better. So it's not just the Bay program, it's all the Clean Air Act and all these other regulatory activities in these other programs.
And you asked if we were optimistic. I am optimistic that we'll get there. Again, I think it's a matter of the timeline, but I think we've got the desire. I think we've finally got the funding in place. I think we've got the momentum to get where we need to get to.
So I think I have time for one more question for each of you to answer. No? All right, they're pushing me off stage. Give a round of applause to thank these people, please.
Well, thank you, panelists, for all the work you're doing to improve our environment. These are great reports. Thank you for your candor. So Rob, Matt, Mike, Becky, Rob, thanks for some great insights today. Let's give them another round of applause. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, our next sessions will begin at 10:00, and at lunchtime, if you'd like to go outside in the courtyard, there's some tents and there's a stone wall to enjoy the nice day out there. Enjoy the rest of the conference.